Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, November 8th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Latino voters across the country and the 2025 election results that show Democrats. Yes, the Democratic Party that hemorrhaged a lot of support amongst Latino voters nationwide in last year's election is winning them back in a major way, going into the 2025 elections in an autopsy and an understanding of what the election results really tell us. How did different demographics shift? How did different, portions of the American populace really change their minds or maybe be inspired enough to turn out in an off-year election? There's so much to really dive into for the next few weeks. That's what this channel is going to be dedicated to. We're going to take a look not just at Latino voters, but we're going to explore many different demographic groups, ranging from race to economic background to political affiliation. I mean, we have seen probably one of the most clear-cut examples in full and broad strokes of what pushback against Donald Trump actually looks like tangibly, not just in terms of election results, but in terms of community-based swings, and helping us understand exactly why that must be and how it can translate to victory for one party or the other. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a little bit, even in the past 2 months, you might know that we've been covering new data points. Exceptionally powerful data points like the one released in the most recent Associated Press NORC poll. And what it told us was that for the first time in a long time, Donald Trump's approval rating has reached a record low amongst Hispanic voters, with 73% of Hispanic adults saying that they believe that this country is going in the wrong direction. And in terms of a view of Donald Trump, 65% of Hispanic adults, this is a number less than 1 month before the election that took place on Tuesday, 65% say they have an unfavorable view of Donald Trump. The last time it was that high was no time over the last 4 years when he was out of office, but instead in the 2019-2020 timeframe, when this was the peak of what you saw was Democratic resistance against Trump's immigration policy. What you saw just brandished from the Democratic Party as cages at the southern border. I mean, you were talking about an exceptionally bad time for Donald Trump, especially as it pertains to support from the Hispanic community. And what we saw was that in the 2020 election, Joe Biden's victory was almost entirely reliant on a shift not in white voters, but a shift and hyper rise in turnout amongst Hispanic voters, black voters, Asian voters across the country. And take a look at these margins. In the 2020 election, Joe Biden won Hispanic and Latino voters 65-32. That is a 33% margin. Do you want to know what it was for Vice President Kamala Harris? In the 2024 election, that was down to a 5-point margin. From 33 to 5%, you can see exactly why the 2020 election and the 2024 election looked dramatically different. When it came down to Arizona, when it came down to Texas, when it came down to Nevada, huge portions of the constituency and electorate are Hispanic voters in these states, among many others like California and Colorado and New Mexico. But all of these states I've mentioned saw a pretty significant rightward shift. It was in 2020, when Donald Trump's approval rating was at a record low then amongst Hispanic voters, that Joe Biden became the first Democrat to win Arizona nationally since 1996, and won Nevada despite Kamala Harris losing it in 2024 for the first time since, Democrats since 2004 by 4 points. But the focus of this video is certainly not an autopsy of last year's election. It's an autopsy of Tuesday's, of what we saw, which was that Democrats did in fact win back Latino voters and huge sections, precinct by precinct, of Hispanic majority Donald Trump precincts in New Jersey and Virginia that found themselves voting, in some cases, overwhelmingly for the Democratic ticket this time around. In fact, we have exit polling data, shout out NBC News, from the state of New Jersey as well. A state where the result for Democrats was roughly identical to that of, we'll see here, let me just show it to you, of Hillary Clinton's in 2016, when Clinton, who had the best margin amongst Hispanic voters of any Democrat in the 21st century, including Obama. But in New Jersey in 2016, Clinton won it by 14.1. Well, guess what happened in 2025? I don't think we have the 2025 results yet on this website. But the point is that a nearly identical margin, and why might that be? A massive reversion, particularly amongst Hispanic and Latino voters, that in New Jersey overwhelmingly backed Mikey Sherrill, the Democrat in this race, 68 to 31, a 37% margin, even outperforming that of Biden's in 2020. And get this, just 1 year of Donald Trump being president. And we saw it happen in the state of Virginia too, where we saw that in this state, Abigail Spanberger won by a pretty significant amount. But a big reason for it was a shift in Hispanic voters and Asian voters in this state. Hispanic voters backed Abigail Spanberger by that magic number of 33%, the same one Biden had in 2020. And we are, 10 months into Donald Trump's administration? I mean, you are talking about quite literally, in American politics timeline, overnight in terms of the change in support amongst constituencies and demographic basis, that it took Republicans a generation to shift, that in less than a year of Donald Trump's first term are barreling back towards the Democratic Party. And as a result, translating into exceptional results for the Democratic Party. A 15-point margin in Virginia, which I want you to understand just how impactful that is, what it did for Democrats in Virginia. It gave Democrats the largest governing majority in the Virginia House of Delegates since 1987 when you look at that race. Democrats are damn near a supermajority in the state of Virginia, and things like that don't happen by accident. And so just thinking about, what we can understand from this is that the Democratic Party, by every metric, demolished the Republicans, and a big reason for it was the change amongst Hispanic voters. Because really, while we did see, to some degree, some change amongst white voters, for instance, right, you saw that overwhelmingly in favor of Trump in 2024, less so in favor of Republicans in 2025, at the end of the day, especially in states like New Jersey, and I'm sure to a much higher degree in states like Arizona, Nevada, and Texas, which historically are known as more competitive, you will find that if this is true, and Democrats are returning to 2020 era numbers or pre-2020 era numbers, some of these results here would show us that in 2026, a lot more states are not only just within reach, but a lot of House seats are as well. In the 2020 election, I know it feels like a lifetime ago, but Donald Trump only won Texas by 5.6%. To put that into perspective, Texas was a more narrow margin than Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, right, Minnesota. You saw New Hampshire, right? The margin here in Texas was nothing short of a spectacular result for Biden, who came with 47% of the vote in the Lone Star State, that it was Hispanic communities that drove Texas towards the right. If we're being completely transparent about, the change in support there, it wasn't that white voters suddenly changed their minds and turned against the Democrats. In fact, when you take a look at some of the exit polling data, you'll see that in 2020, in the exit polls, amongst white voters, Donald Trump led them by 17%. In 2024, get this, white voters went to Trump by 15%. So yes, the massive reversion amongst Asian voters made a difference. Yes, the massive reversion amongst Hispanic voters made a difference. And the slight change amongst black voters nationwide also made a difference. We saw that and even too, when you see minority communities that are grouped into others, so this could be Pacific Islander, this could be, Native American, whatever, literally whatever. That's what the other category, it extends far beyond things that they don't think are substantive enough, so they're going to say other. If you don't identify, what do you say? Donald Trump won those voters by 14 points. It doesn't seem like it's super substantial. But in 2020, the other category went to Biden by 14%. A 28-point swing overnight. Hispanic voters, an even larger, or actually maybe no, it's an identical 28% swing as well. Wow, making it easy for us. But now it's all starting to swing back. And that is the story of the elections. All of these Republican talking points too about, we are a new party. We are reborn in a way that is more diverse than ever. Are you? Because yes, 2024 was a reshaping of the election, and no doubt about it, I think extraordinarily impressive for the GOP. They won every swing state. They won the Senate. They won the House. Sure. But it was, the same time 4 years ago, the Democrats won their trifecta as well. And 4 years before then, the Republicans won their trifecta. Things change in American politics. But to the degree that, Republicans who have been trying their hardest at winning over specifically the Latino community, where you see now a county, for instance, I think this is a great example of how you can find that returning to that 2020 era numbers reminds me of what we're seeing on Election Day. Well, what we saw on Election Day, for instance, in Miami, where we saw that Miami-Dade County and Miami saw that their mayoral election was taking place. Okay, cool. What happened there? Well, the combined Democratic vote share was 52%. Wait, hold on. Donald Trump won the county 55-44. It's an 11-point Trump county, and yet Democrats are finding themselves getting the majority of the vote there. What does that remind you of? The 2020 election performance, where Joe Biden got around 53% of the vote. Democrats were at 52 just on Tuesday in the county. Maybe it's not an example of massive improvements enough that you could win Florida. Certainly not. Joe Biden couldn't do it. But he did only lose the state by 3. And a big reason for that was that he was able to hold on to some of the Latino voters in the state. Florida just so happened to be the state that all the Republicans flocked to during the COVID-19 pandemic. Huge influxes of hundreds of thousands of voters that ID'd 9-1 Republican as they came into the state. And in a narrow victory like this, yeah, things like that can make a difference. I'm not saying that Biden could have won Florida if it was 2016, but if he did have Hillary Clinton's numbers amongst Hispanics and the numbers amongst white voters in Florida were maintained, it actually was very much within reach. Hillary Clinton only lost the state by a point. I say this all to note that I don't think Democrats are suddenly going to become competitive in Florida. And I think 2025 is a much better year for Democrats than 2026 will be, or 2028 for that matter, because the lower that you find higher propensity voters turning out, meaning lower vote share in total, the better for the Democratic Party, at least as we are at initial glance. But in either case, there is something to be said about Trump Latino precincts that were historically extraordinarily for the Democratic Party, and then in 2020 we saw slight hemorrhaging, and then in 2024 it was like something had changed overnight. Obviously, it's far more complicated than that, and I don't like to lump things in as a monolith, but I do think that in understanding that precincts are very narrow, by the way. I mean, you were talking about some cases precincts can come down to just a few thousand voters. If they are shifting by that much, it is the same voters that voted for Trump that are shifting. It's not a change in population. It's not a change in new boundaries. It's not a census. You're right. These aren't the things that are happening. It is quite literally a change in sentiment. And even in the exit polls, it is so apparent. And I think what it tells us, something we've known for a while with some of these numbers, is that it isn't just a bad headline that Latino voters are abandoning Trump and that's the worst the administration has to fear. They have to fear an entire political party that, even to the degree that they looked at the last election and said, every trend we like will be constant and every trend we don't will stop, and redrew their maps in states like Texas under this assumption that Hispanic communities were going to trend in a direction that benefited their political party, laugh out loud looking at some of these results. Because you could find that this new Texas map could find itself being placed into a dummy mander. But when I think about districts like Texas 28 and Texas 34, it becomes a little bit less certain that these districts that did vote for Democrats last time, that have been drawn to be maybe 3 or 4 points more Republican, will suddenly jump over to the GOP, especially in a Democratic wave. And these counties and these districts in specific, well, when you look at the demographic breakdown, you'll see exactly why numbers like these and headlines like these should terrify Republicans. The point is, and I think what has been maintained throughout this video, is that Latino voters have really turned away from the GOP for a variety of different reasons. Whether issues surrounding the economy, healthcare, immigration, foreign policy, Hispanic voters are a huge voting bloc that Republicans felt like they were doing tremendously well with, and they did in 2024. But it is short-lived. As we see the administration not just tank amongst Hispanic voters, but voters nationwide in terms of approval, it's actually not all that surprising that you see that these numbers change tremendously and in such a substantial way. And I do think that the administration is going to have to do a lot of self-reflection, and Republicans too, about how they win these voters back. Because as it stands right now, not a great sign for the 2026 midterms, not a great sign for the 2028 election. And if these numbers continue, Republicans are set for an even bigger defeat than what they saw in 2018 and in 2020 in the upcoming elections, respectively, as we see that these voters are abandoning the Republican Party in record ways. And we'll see exactly what the impact of that is in 1 year from today. But if 2025 was an indicator of anything, the Republican Party absolutely needs to buckle up. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.